Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Queen of Pain. So Queen of Pain is a mid hero, and as such she is a lane dominating, ganking, snowball type of mid hero. And so how you want to think of her is you want to be really aggressive early on and really harass the enemy out of lane, contest every CS, get as much last hits as possible, and eventually, even before 6 or hopefully at level 6, you can kill the enemy mid, really snowball the mid. She doesn't take the tower very easily, but she can really be aggressive in the mid lane and crush the mid lane, especially against the right matchups. She does have some bad matchups where she doesn't do that well, so she is kind of a situational pick just based on how the hero works, in that if you pick her into a bad matchup and she doesn't really do what she wants to do, it can feel really, really bad because this hero can farm the jungle, can clear waves, but early on especially, her spells are pretty expensive, so you're usually not going to have the mana to farm everywhere and go and gank, because really what you want to be doing with this hero is being really aggressive in the mid lane, crushing the mid lane, and then going to the side lanes and killing the enemy, carry, the enemy off lane, whatever it is, constantly rotating around the map, snowballing the game, being really strong early on, and just pressuring the opponent constantly, just not letting them get comfortable and farm ever. And so this hero can be a little bit complicated to play. It can be a little bit harder to play for newer players because although it can be really good at dominating the lane, transitioning from the lane and using all of that, that good laning stage, that domination in the lane, and transitioning that into the early and mid game and helping your team can be a little bit difficult. It can be something that you really need to practice and work on and focus on, getting into the side lanes, helping out your team, snowballing the game, because the way to think about this hero is she can be extremely, extremely good if you have a great start. But if you have a bad lane matchup, if you don't gank the side lanes, if you don't apply pressure on the map in general, she can kind of fall off. She can feel very hard to play because she, is pretty squishy. She does have a blink ability, but if she's not able to do a ton of damage, burst people down, blink in and be aggressive, then if she's only using her blink defensively, if she has to walk around and can't use it offensively because, then she'll just get blown up, she can feel pretty weak, she can fall off later, and it's harder for her to carry the game if she's not snowballing it like that. So she is a little bit harder of a hero to play, but if you know how to play her, if you can dominate the lane, if you can gank for your team, if you can snowball the game, she can crush games really, really easily. And so that's Queen of Pain. That's how to think about her conceptually. Early game hero, snowball hero, can fall off later, does have some good later, spells and abilities and talents and things like that, but that's the main way to think about her in the game. Now, briefly, before we move on to looking at her abilities, I just want to say one last thing, and that is, although Queen of Pain is an early game kind of, spell-focused hero, you can actually build this hero more for her right click later on. So you can get something like Orchid and then BKB, but you could also get items that do a lot of right click damage because she has a decent right click. She has a good amount of damage. Her right click, is pretty fast. She has a good attack animation. She is a ranged hero. So if you can build tanky right click items, you can actually kind of go carry almost like, an SF from the mid. SF has a spell build that you can do a lot of spell damage, but he can also do a lot of right click damage. So you can think of Queen of Pain in that way. And because of that, she can scale later into the game a little bit better than some other heroes. Although if you aren't snowballing the game, like I said, normally she can fall off. She can feel very hard to play. So that's how to think of Queen of Pain. And now let's look at her abilities and see how she's able to do that. So now that we understand QoP in general, we can take a look at her abilities and see how she's able to be a lane dominator, but also snowball the game with a lot of magic damage, and then sometimes be a right-click hero later on in the game. So first, we're just going to take a look at her Q spell. This is Shadow Strike. This is basically the ability that allows her to be a lane dominating hero. Essentially, all you do is you just click the ability and then click it on a hero, and she shoots out a little dagger thing that hits the hero, does damage, and then applies a debuff that does periodic damage over time. And so basically, this is her lane dominating ability because it doesn't allow the enemy to salve up. It doesn't allow the enemy to bottle up because it's going to cancel that early on by, the hero taking damage. And then it also, after a few, levels in this, it can do a ton of damage and really, really, zone out the enemy because especially at max level, it's a pretty low cooldown. It does a significant amount of damage. As you see, it's doing a decent amount of damage to a tanky axe that is, level 11, and it's still doing a decent amount of damage. And you can cast this a bunch. And obviously, you're not going to be laning against a level 11 axe. You'll have a lot of squishier heroes, sometimes intelligence heroes. They'll be lower level, not have as much HP. And so This ability, if you do max it, which sometimes you will, it just depends on the skill build. As always, follow the in-game guides, the skill build for the time. But it can be really, really good in lanes, and that's really her lane dominating spell. You just basically walk up to the creeps, you start last hitting the creeps, do your normal thing mid, and then if the enemy walks up, you just say, okay, well, take this dagger, take some damage passively, and have fun trying to regen, have fun trying to stay in this lane. And the other thing it also does is it applies a decent slow as well. So if you are clicking this on people in fights or in the mid lane, it also allows you to catch up to them, click them more, do more right click damage, all that kind of thing. So it's a pretty good spell. It's kind of a lane dominating spell, but also like later in the game, it's a little bit of a control spell with that slow. So that is Shadow Strike. And then next, we're looking at Blink. It's pretty simple. It's just a blink. It's a pretty decent range, as you see there, and it has a low cooldown once you level it up. Not the best cooldown early on, so you have to be careful with this blink, but it's just like any other blink in the game. You just click it in a direction, or if you have auto cast on, you can just click it, wherever, and she'll just blink in that direction. So that's kind of how I use it with all different kinds of blink abilities. I just have the auto cast ability on. So if we go into the settings here, we can say there's cast or quick cast, sorry, and you just click W, and whichever direction, wherever your mouse is, it'll go. So I just click W, and then she'll go in that direction. And, so you see the range here. If I click out of the range, it doesn't really matter. She'll just blink max range. So that's kind of how you want to use the ability. That's how I use most blink abilities in the game. And so that's pretty much blink. Pretty simple. You use this to blink in, be aggressive when you think you can. You also use this to escape, to split push the map, all of those kinds of things. Any normal blink, this is sort of the same kind of thing. And just obviously like a blink ability that isn't a blink, item, you also could just use it when you're taking damage. So it's really, really good. Has a pretty low cooldown later in the game, so you can use it constantly, which is good. So that's Blink. And next, Scream of Pain. So Scream of Pain is just an AoE damage ability. So as we see, you just click the ability and it lets out a little scream, and anything in that AoE will be hit with this little bit of damage that does damage once it hits. So we see, you use it, a little thing comes out and just does damage to anything in that AoE. So this is good to both jump into team fights. So, you're back here, you see a bunch of people, you jump in and then you use that. It does a good bit of damage. But also, obviously, this is a decent farming spell. Now, it does cost a good bit of mana as you level it up. So, it is kind of expensive. So, if you're like running around the map, you're using your Q, you're using your Scream of Pain, you're using your Sonic Wave, which is the ultimate that we'll take a look at in a second, you will use a lot of mana. Now, this is an int hero, but mana is one of the biggest things for this hero. Like, to use all of the spells will take a lot of the mana pool. So, just keep that in mind. But this is basically the farming spell and the decent damage mid-game spell. I mean, it has decent damage all around in the game, but also a decent low cooldown, so you can use it multiple times in fights. Yes. So that's one of the ways that she has a lot of burst damage. And then last, we'll look at her ultimate. This is Sonic Wave. So while the other two abilities do magical damage, this is currently pure damage, and the reason why that's good is because it doesn't take into account, pipe or anything like that, any kind of magic resistance. So this is why once you hit 6, you can do a ton of damage to the enemy mid or, the enemy carry that isn't even level 6 yet. You can always secure a kill with this, especially early on. And so basically you will, it's pretty simple. You blink in, you use some of your abilities, and then you use your Scream of Pain. And so when you use the Scream of Pain, the one thing about this is it is a little bit of an ability that you need to aim, because although it is AoE, it's AoE in a cone in front of Queen of Pain, whichever direction you kind of push it. So basically, if you're standing here and I cast it over here, it will put a cone that gets wider as it goes, further out. And so if we see here, it'll hit the dummy target right here when it's to the side, but if I, cast it up here, we'll refresh a little bit. If I cast it up here, it will actually miss the dummy target. So you need to be careful where you're casting this. Now, as you saw, when I casted it on the axe, it actually does push him back a little bit. So it is a little bit of a control spell. Also has a kind of stun built in there as well. So it'll basically push people back when you use it. It obviously is pure, so it pierces spell immunity, which is really good. You also need to keep in mind, when you're pushing people back or what you're doing, sometimes it won't be good to push them out of, where you want to click them or other things like that. So just keep that in mind, that this does kind of reposition the enemy. So that can be very good for you. It can also be kind of bad for you. And there is a small cast time. So, if people are running, you kind of want to cast it ahead of them and those kinds of things. So just keep all those things in mind, but it is a really, really good burst damage spell. It does a ton of damage. And so that's why it has these other things like the cone, like the pushback, also like the delay, because otherwise it would be super imbalanced if it was just instant and all those other things. It was like AoE around you and all that kind of stuff. So those are her abilities. I will say that blink is something that you need to really like make sure you're using it correctly. This is the biggest thing on the hero. Any kind of blink hero like this, anti-mage or her or anything like that, making sure you're using blink correctly, that you're not blinking it too aggressively when you're just going to die, that you're saving it and those kinds of things. It's really, really important to use that in the correct way. So this is basically how you use her abilities. Now, I'll show you pretty much how you want to perform combos on the hero. Usually, you just want to, if you get an Orchid, you blink in, you silence them, you use your abilities like this, and then you cast your ults. Now, it's pretty simple. You can kind of use them in any order you want, but just like a Storm Spear or anything else, when you blink in, you usually want to use Orchid first. And then the reason why you cast your Shadow Strike first is because it does tick damage over time. It also is pretty low cooldown, so you can use it again if you need to, and it disables any kind of blinks, and it also slows them down. So if there is some kind of blink or instant thing that they will, like BKB or something like that, you can blink in and instantly use Scream so that you disable their blink, which is an option. So you kind of want to use either one of these, but then eventually you want to slow them down, so it does make hitting your ult a little bit easier. So that is basically Queen of Pain. It's actually pretty simple. You usually go Orchid, but you don't always have to. If you want to build, more of like a right-click build, you see some of these recommended items are like AC, Shivas. You have some right-click items like Bloodthorn, all of that kind of stuff. You even have a lot of armor items, because you can build armor items, you can build tanky on this hero, and then when she levels up, she clicks for a decent amount of damage. You see the right-click attack animation is pretty fast there. It's not slow or anything like that, so she can be kind of like a tanky right-clicker if you do build her the correct way. So she's not just a magical damage burst hero, but in the early game, that is what you want to be doing on this hero. So that is Queen of Pain's abilities, and now let's take a look at how to play her in a game. So now we're jumping into a replay here of Emo playing Queen of Pain versus Storm Spear, and this is usually a good matchup for Queen of Pain for a lot of different reasons, but unfortunately for him, he doesn't get the good block, and Storm gets the good block, so it's on Storm's Hill, which is really an advantage for Storm early on. So he actually goes for Scream of Pain first, his E ability, because he wants to secure last hits. And what you'll see is the reason why he doesn't go for the Harass ability first and the Shadow Strike is because basically Shadow Strike is a decent amount of mana. Like I said, the mana for Queen of Pain can be a problem at points. So what you want to do, and what he does here, is he levels, obviously, the Shadow Strike second. But we'll see that he doesn't actually use it until he gets level 3, because it basically doubles its effectiveness for not very much more mana. So instead of using all of his mana early on to try to harass, he uses a little bit of mana early with a Scream of Pain to secure the last hits, to secure his levels. And then we'll see that he uses his level 2 dagger once he hits level 3 to really harass the Storm out of lane. So basically, up until that point, he's just kind of playing the lane a little bit normally. Now, I would say that depending on the matchup, if you're against a melee hero, maybe going, dagger first or Shadow Strike first would be really, really good. And you could just harass early. But just keep in mind that you don't want to use all of your mana to harass early, because then you won't have any mana when you level up to level 2 at least. So, okay, now he's level 3. Now the lane, the creeps are on his hill, and watch how aggressive he gets. The Storm knows that this is what he wants to do, so the Storm, being a good player as well, is going to try to get aggressive right back on him. But unfortunately, the lane has now turned to Queen of Pain's favor, because this level 2 Shadow Strike is just going to do so much damage to Storm, and it's not going to allow him to regen as he wants to. So we see, finally, she gets her bottle out here, which is really good for her. Now she has a ton of mana. Storm is low, despite the fact that he did get a rune, but he's just not able to regen his health like he wants to because of the Shadow Strike. So now the Storm is low, and this is just at a position where, the Storm is basically going to be crying right now. If this is you against a Storm at your level, the guy will just be like raging right now, because obviously this Storm is a good player. This Storm knows how to play this lane. The Storm knows what he's doing. He's trying to get the most out of the lane. This is not going to happen to you. This wouldn't even happen to me in my games. If you were this aggressive, if you're playing the Queen of Pain against Storm matchup, and he has this low of health and he can't approach the wave, and you're even like doing what he's doing right here with this rune, where he's kind of just baiting the rune, saying, hey, if you want to go for the rune, go for it, and I'll just kill you. Like, this is just some next level stuff. If you're able to lane like this against the Storm with the Queen of Pain, you're going to, like, do really, really well. the enemy's going to be so sad, and it's going to really not work at all. Now, he does go here in, and he is baiting because he knows his Nyx is here. Just kind of baiting the storm in, plus he has a Fairy Fire, and it works out. He actually gets a little bit too close for comfort there, probably, but because the storm is able to perform a decent combo, and the storm does have the high ground. But now, even with, you know, such good players as they are, he's able to just dominate in this matchup. And so this is the perfect example of how you're able to dominate with Queen of Pain. And so usually, I mean, you can follow the skill build. Sometimes maxing Q is really good. But if you don't want to max Q, getting at least 2 points is usually the way to go, unless, you know, it's a patch where, you know, your Shadow Strike is just that good. It just always depends. Like I said, follow the guides. But this is a great example of how to just dominate a lane with Queen of Pain here. And so that, I think, is the Queen of Pain laning stage. It's pretty simple. You know, harass the enemy, be aggressive, get your last hits, all of those kinds of things. And then once you hit 6, that's when the game changes a little bit for you. So next we're going to look at a replay of GPK playing Queen of Pain mid, and actually it was kind of an even matchup mid because Silencer's a pretty good matchup against this Queen of Pain, especially right now. So there was a few fights mid that I didn't show you because, you know, you don't really have to do anything, the fight just comes to you. But now it's 12 minutes, he has his ultimate up, and, you know, he sees that a bunch of his allies are bottom. They did fight bottom a little bit, but his first priority is to clear the mid wave, make sure there's no pressure on his mid tower. So he makes sure that happens, and now he has his ult, and he looks to rotate. And this is just a good example of how to make a rotation with Queen of Pain, but also how good Queen of Pain can be early on with her ultimates, with her spells and her ultimate, and how she can just burst people down. So you see a missile comes in, a rocket goes and hits the Night Stalker, and she literally full to zeros the Night Stalker by herself with her spells. Night Stalker is a typically tanky hero, especially early on in the game. It's very hard to burst him full to zero, especially one-on-one. But as you can see right there, this is the perfect example of how good Queen of Pain can be, bursting people down, making ganks in the mid game. So I think that's a great example. It's something you want to do with this hero, and that's how you're going to snowball the game with this hero. So the next thing I want to show you is how Queen of Pain can be used as a right-click hero, not just as a, you know, burst damage spell hero. And a lot of newer players or lower MMR players kind of don't understand that about the hero. So we're going to see GPK comes in here and goes on this Night Stalker because he knows the Night Stalker is alone. But you'll see that although he uses a couple spells early on, he actually just uses the slow of the Shadow Strike to allow him to get more right-clicks in. And he uses most of his mana for blinks. And so I think this is a great example about how this hero is kind of a right-click hero in ways that you wouldn't think. And you don't want to be wasting all of your mana. He even had ult up, but he didn't use it because he knew getting those, you know, right-clicks in there and getting that blink and stuff was going to be more important than using all of his spells, especially at this point in the game. So the last thing I want to show you here is how to team fight on the hero. The hero is also obviously really good at split pushing and all of those kinds of things, but team fighting is really important because she obviously has a blink, but she can be very squishy. So usually you go BKB on this hero, and you'll see in this team fight how GPK kind of sits in the back and waits to go on the hero that he knows is a big threat, which is Bane. And then as soon as Bane is dead, he also blinks in, immediately pops his BKB, and then tries to kill the Clinks. And this is exactly how you want to play Queen of Pain in the fights. You basically want to sit back and sort of wait. If you know it's going to be a 5-5 engagement, you don't want to use your blink to just go in on the first person you see. You want to make sure you're using your blink to blink onto someone that is vulnerable, a support, someone that threatens you, that you can disable them with your Orchid, something like that. And then you also want to make sure that you're popping your BKB relatively early on if you know there's threats to you, because honestly, she's pretty squishy if she gets locked down. She can get bursted full to zero. So BKB is super important on this hero. So I think that team fight is a really, really good example of how to use this hero in a team fight, how to kind of position yourself, wait to see when to go in, and choose your target effectively. And then once you do, you know, go in and choose your target, you pop your BKB, you use your spells, you right-click a bunch, and those kinds of things. So I think that's a great example of how to team fight on Queen of Pain and in general with this hero. So this hero can be really effective, but like any other hero with a blink that can be squishy, even like Anti-Mage or something like that, you have to choose your targets effectively. You have to be good at, you know, blinking incorrectly. I think using blink is one of the biggest things on this hero. If you use it correctly, you will win games. If you use it incorrectly, you will just feed and lose games. And so that's kind of my Queen of Pain overview. Obviously, she's really good at split pushing and those kinds of things and ganking, and she does farm pretty well once she gets mana to use her spells. So you see, you know, as I'm explaining the team fight there, She's just farming jungle. She's pretty good at farming. This is what you're going to be doing mid-game, clearing waves. She's really good at split pushing. She's hard to catch. So that's kind of how you want to play her mid-game when you're not team fighting, when you're not ganking, is obviously you just farm, you split push, those kinds of things, almost like an anti-mage and that kind of stuff. And then you can build her later on in the game as a sort of right-click tanky hero, pick your targets effectively, and win the game that way. So you're not going to maybe be able to, you still want to rely on a carry and things like that if you're not completely snowballing the game. Obviously, this is very high MMR that we're taking a look at right now, so he's not going to just crush the game by himself, but he's a significant reason why they're at a 7k lead, and he'll scale into the late game pretty well with this hero. So I hope all that makes sense. I hope you understand a little bit of how to play Queen of Pain. For a brief summary, obviously you're a lane-dominating hero. You really want to crush the lane, and you can do that against a lot of other heroes, but there are some bad matchups that you have, so you have to be careful about that. Then once you hit 6, you're going to be using your spells to burst heroes down, maybe even the mid lane. You can kill the mid hero, or you can rotate to the side lanes and burst almost any hero in the game early on. And then, obviously, once you go to mid game, you're going to want to split push the lanes, gank, and then in team fights, obviously pick your targets correctly. As we see him doing here again in a team fight, is he's picking his targets. The Bane is obviously a big threat to him, and so is the Silencer with the spells. So that's why he's focusing on the Silencer while he's BKB'd. And as soon as he sees that his BKB is wearing off and the Night Stalker with the silence is coming in, he blinks away. So using your blink effectively obviously is super important as well. So I hope that helps you. I hope that helps you understand how to play Queen of Pain better. And if you like the video, as always, give it a like, comment, subscribe, all of those kinds of things. If you want me to take a look at one of your replays, regardless of position or hero, I'd be happy to do so. Just let me know in the comments. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.